Well, welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Long Game Podcasts coming after a long weekend. I am your host, Ben Scallon, here with your other host, Jason Osborne. And I thought, Jason, we might just launch into the absolute decrepit state of Irish society from a law and order perspective. I actually was recently having a conversation with somebody who has not been in Ireland in a long time. He was from Dublin and he had been living in the UK for many years and traveling. And I was saying how Dublin is a kip, and he kind of pushed back on this, and he said, listen, everywhere has its bad spots, and I wouldn't be talking down our capital city like that. Sure, that's not a nice way to talk about the place you were born and reared. And then he actually went out of a night in Dublin for the first time in years, and he came back and he was like, "Yeah, no, you were right. I just have to take the L on that one." So I suppose the most prominent example that everybody's been talking about is the Capel Street incident. And for those who don't know, I'm sure all of you do know, but there was a Garda stabbed, non-fatally, thank God, hospitalized, but seems to be doing okay. Other than that, no imminent risk of death or serious injury. But that's obviously an incredibly serious issue. We're somewhat restricted in what we can say about this, given that it is an active case before the courts. An individual has been charged with that offense. But I'm wondering if you have a reaction, Jason, to the fact that not only Gardaí are being stabbed in broad daylight in the middle of our capital city, but some of the media reaction to this and their coverage of the alleged assailant, who is 23-year-old Abdullah Khan, is the individual who's been charged. I'm wondering if you have any reaction or you'd like to take it from there.
Yeah, I definitely do. I mean, as you say, it's sort of a broader discussion about the state of law and order in Ireland, which I don't think anyone could argue is in decline, given that, and I'm sure we'll chat about this later on. I was out of Dublin for the weekend. I was over in the West, and was it the morning of our return? I saw in the headlines that just about 15 minutes down the road from my parents' house, a man armed with a sword is in court after assaulting a Garda. So, like, you and I are admittedly young. I'm turning 30 next year. You're turning what, 29 next year? Is that? Yeah. And I just don't remember things like this happening. It isn't to say the guards weren't, as you say, thankfully, this guard was stabbed non-fatally in on Capel Street, and no guards were killed in that incident in Ballyogan, as I mentioned. But I know that there were, say, dissident Republicans killing guards over the years in Ireland, but it seems like things. The Capel Street thing just happened. I forget the day exactly. Last week, and then you had this fellow with the sword who one of the papers was reporting said as he sort of lunged at the guards that he'll effing kill them.
Yeah, actually, do you mind if I read a little bit about that? Because this is
Please.
unbelievable. Because this is separate to the Capel Street incident. So first we had a guard stabbed on Capel Street, and then, as Jason says, in addition to that, we had the following. This is reported from Dublin Live. They say,
Mhm.
man in court over samurai sword attack on Gardaí allegedly shouted, "I will effing kill you all." This man is accused of attacking a Garda with a 2-foot-long samurai sword and shouting, "I will effing kill you." Zig Zbigniew
Zbigniew, I think.
Zbigniew Pisula, 45, with an address at Drimna Park in Dublin, appeared before a special sitting of Dublin's district court today, charged with assaulting a Garda, possession of a samurai sword, and resisting arrest under the Public Order Act. Detective Garda Donovan said unarmed Gardaí told the accused man to drop the sword, but he took a combative stance and refused, allegedly brandishing the weapon in a menacing way and swinging it towards an officer. A Garda took evasive action, he said, and pepper spray was deployed, but did not have any effect. By the way, as a brief aside, this isn't really the point of the story, but isn't it weird how often pepper spray ends up having no effect? Or like when you hear about a guy getting tased, then he just keeps running at them. I don't understand
When he's in
how.
a when he's in a combative stance, it has no effect.
Maybe, yeah, it's like berserker rage or something. I don't understand how that works exactly, but Um, Regardless, he was told to drop the weapon. He didn't. One of the Gardaí was actually cut on the arm while they were grappling with the guy, trying to stop him. A lot of this was happening. He ran across the green area in front of a garden of a home with a small child. And then lastly, Gardaí drew their weapons, they made verbal demands, and this is the from the article. The accused man is alleged to have told officers at the scene, I will effing kill you all and effing kill me. You will all effing die and shoot me. He is alleged to have continued to say, I will kill you before Gardaí swarmed him and made an effort to remove the sword and so on and so forth. So again, alleged. He's in court. He's not been convicted in a court of law. We have to be very clear and careful about how we cover these things, and we want to be responsible journalists. But
Yeah.
that was in addition to the Garda who was stabbed in our capital city within very quick succession. So, I mean, is that not something that we should be talking about maybe as a society, or are we to treat these as isolated incidents when they're happening every
Like,
5 minutes,
I
it seems?
know I know people who are very resistant to the Ireland is heading in the wrong direction because they're so fond of their social progress that they can't sort of bear the idea that it's having ill effects. They're very they often say when people complain about, say, Dublin in particular having become more dangerous, they're like, "Oh, are all the people on the right such wussies that they can't go into town for a wander around?" I think there's something to that. I think that we sometimes overstate the degree of danger in this. Like, because on the statistically, and indeed, whenever we're here, I go into the city all the time. I've never had anything happen to me. Statistically, you're very unlikely to have something happen to you. That doesn't change the fact that the odds are seem to be rising of something happening. So, like, just because it's very unlikely to happen to you, and because it has, and just because it hasn't happened to you, as is the case, with people who push back, doesn't mean that it's not getting more dangerous. And indeed, that a lot of people haven't suffered because of that. Because as we see, people are so, unfortunately, at the moment, it seems to be guards in the firing line because, whatever we might think about, say, sort of the approach An Garda Síochána is taking to certain topics at the moment, shall we say, that many of them continue to do very valuable work and continue to keep the streets safe, to put it that way, can't be denied. I mean, I, for one, am grateful for the guards swarming this lad with a 2-foot long samurai sword. But it's just to say that things are getting more dangerous can't be denied. And like, I feel like we're being given sort of cases that are almost farcical in terms of how dangerous they are. Like, as you say, the case in Capel Street is before the courts currently as well, so we're limited in terms of what we can say about that. It does get me thinking about whether, certainly after the weekend we just had, because we were chatting about this before we went off, before we went on air, I should say, about whether those of us in Dublin, as mentioned, viewers will be well aware at this stage that I am just visiting Dublin currently, don't live here any longer, nor do you live in Dublin. But I would still obviously associate myself very much with Dublin in terms of this being where we visit and things. But as I say, this all gets me thinking about whether those of us living or associated with Dublin have gotten the short end of the stick. Because one thing that I was curious to chat with you about, it isn't a particularly newsy topic, but I think it's certainly an important topic in Ireland because there's been long-standing tensions between, obviously, Dublin-centric focus that government and Irish authorities seem to have, um, and the relative neglect, I suppose, of the area outside of Dublin when it comes to investment in all sorts of ways. But leaving all that aside, I do wonder whether those in Dublin sort of got the short end of the stick in terms of the experience of life in Ireland, given, as we just outlined, the fairly apparent rise in lawlessness. Because you, Ben, have moved out of Dublin into the countryside. I used to live down in Waterford for before we moved up to Dublin for about 5 years. We lived very rurally. We were in between Dungarvan and Youghal. So I got a full experience of life in the sticks, to put it that way. And you're obviously in the process of getting your full experience. Um, I was reminded over the past couple of days, certainly in the context of modern Ireland, how much more pleasant life in the countryside is. It might seem a bit of a strange segue from the topic we were just talking about, but it just seemed a lot more peaceful to me. I know I'm not living there, and I know uh, the entirety of Ireland outside of Dublin isn't immune from the effects of ill governance, we might say. But it just seems to me that I'm not going to romanticize it or anything, but it is a different experience to life in the Pale, for want of a better way of putting it. I'd be curious first to hear your reflections on it before I sort of share mine.
Yeah, I mean, I'm living in the middle of nowhere. I'm living out in Longford. Like the nearest town is like, or sorry, the nearest shop even. Like it's like a little tiny shop that just does, you know, the basic sort of newsagent stuff. It's like a petrol station, and it's not for, you'd have to walk an hour and a half to get there, you know, that kind of a way. So I'm property, which is how I like it. Like that's by design. I would like to live out in the middle of nowhere. I just want to make sure that when I open my window, I smell cow manure first thing. That's like the goal. But I've been told, to your point about how even, you know, the rest of the country is not immune from these problems, what locals tell me, I'm living in Longford, and locals have told me that Longford town is also a kip that you would rather avoid. Now, Longford people, before you get offended, I'm not saying that. That's what other people have told me. I've actually not spent much time in Longford town, so I can't speak to its goodness or its badness. That's not for me to say. I don't know. I'm just telling you what other people have told me, that even some of these towns in the various regions of the country have problems and are becoming a little bit more antisocial. So, again, I've not experienced that firsthand. Thank God I'm in the middle of nowhere. All my neighbors are lovely, delightful people who I'm very pleased to live around. But yeah, it seems like it's sort of a society wide trend that is unfolding in any sort of major population center or even a moderately sized population center. You really want to be living in a village that has no bus route in order to escape it at this stage.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting. Like, and you have to talk honestly about these things as well. We were visiting, we were over near, funny enough, Tuam in Galway. We were near Claremorris, and we spent some time in Claremorris. And it is funny. You certainly say it's not immune from sort of the social change taking place in Ireland. There was quite a noticeable sort of, I would say, I don't have much experience with Claremorris, but quite a noticeable demographic shift in that, like, we were bringing our kids to a playground in a nearby sort of astroturfed area. There's a bunch of, I would say, secondary school aged kids playing. And and I'm not exaggerating here. I'm not trying to stoke anything. There were, I would say, two what you would describe as sort of like ethnically or natively Irish boys amongst them, amongst a um, sort of group who sort of quite clearly weren't. But so that's definitely a change to take place. On the flip side, they were all getting along very well, having as good a time as, you know, any group of young lads I've ever seen. So it's not to say that that's automatically a negative change. It's just it is a change that can be observed when you get outside of Dublin.
Yeah, I'm
But
sorry,
I was
very,
thinking,
very sorry to interrupt, but like I remember recently I was in a shop and I was standing in the queue waiting to get what I wanted. This was not near where I live, but this was just in Ireland. And I realized that the people behind the counter were of a foreign extraction. The three people in front of me in the queue were of a foreign extraction, and the one guy behind me in the queue was of a foreign extraction, and that we were the only people in the shop. And I look like I'm of a foreign. I look Arab, so probably anybody looking in would have thought it was 100%. But anyway, um, so yeah, again, as you say, it's not to say that that's a good thing or a bad thing. Those every person in that shop might have been a saint who's a better person than me and who puts me to shame. I'm not saying anything about their character.
wouldn't be hard.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's true. Yeah, the bar is pretty low. But you know, that's not to say anything about the substance of their character or whether that's a good thing or a bad thing for society. But it would give you whiplash, the dramatic nature of that shift depending on where you go, and in some contexts you go, Janie Mac, that's a big deal. Whether it's a good big deal or a bad big deal is another question, but it is a big deal what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, we're even sort of segueing slightly from what I was intending on talking about, but I always think it's valuable to discuss these things. Was what I really crave in sort of the Irish public space, and this isn't limited to Ireland. I would say probably across the West, because I see it on the internet as well. It's just normal conversations about these things. I mean, I would say my primary sympathies are certainly with like, people of goodwill, because I think you sort of risk getting into dangerous territory a lot of the time when you kind of go beyond that in terms of a lot of the fears that are around today. It isn't to say that I don't think Ireland should be, as we've said 100 million times on this podcast, anyone who'll be listening, Ireland should be enforcing immigration law. It should be taking care of things like social cohesion, because the strategy that it's pursuing at the moment clearly runs contrary to that. But as I say, in instances like this, um, I think you'd have to be a bit of a nutcase to criticize, like, say, as I observed, or as you observed, a group of people where I said Irish people are not in the majority, but they appear to be living sort of perfectly peaceably, and getting on well with in the instance that I observed, the I would say natively or ethnically Irish guys who were playing football there. I would say there's a lot more good than bad in that situation, and I think that it seems obvious to me, and I think that as I say, you sort of get into difficult territory when you would say that there isn't more good than bad in that situation. But it's all just to say that, yeah, you kind of crave being able to discuss that, like, there is a change taking place. It's observable, as I say. Got out of Dublin, and it was a plain. I wouldn't say Dublin. Dublin is in a league of its own. It's not as plain out there, say, as it is here. But just to be able to notice things like that, and also to notice, like, say, where the downsides of that, but also where it's not quite so downside that people are inclined to doom about on the internet, that I think is really unhealthy. But as I say, that's even a slight tangent. I was more curious, and this is a bit of a general conversation, to ask you what you think the relative merits are of living outside of the city, because it just seems to me that, again, I have lots of experience of living in the countryside at this stage. We live in the city presently, and we lived in the city for the past while, but like, even being out, like, didn't see a single Garda car the entire time we were outside of Dublin, and that was extremely refreshing to me. Didn't see anything that hinted of the political, as I say, other than, like, that you can see the effects of governance choices over the past couple of years. As I say, in this instance, they weren't particularly ill effects from my perspective. Um, but you don't see, like, the stupid local authority graphics that you see everywhere in Dublin. You don't see reminders, I suppose, of just the stupid way in which the country's been run as frequently as you do in Dublin. And it struck me, indeed, my wife and I, was telling you this again before we went on air, we do plan, I think, on moving into the countryside um at some point in the future. Just strikes us, sort of certainly moving out of the city center where we live currently. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts about it, given that you guys have made that change in your couple, well, months. I can't remember exactly how long into it now.
Yeah, I'd say we're about 4 or 5 months here now, and I'd say the only drawback that I've experienced so far is the internet going every 5 minutes. Like, that's and the electricity in general, just constantly scheduled power outages. Oh, we're not going to go over that again. We've discussed that on a previous episode, but that is absolutely head wrecking and
Just to
unnecessary.
note humorously, like, there was a day last week where, if I remember correctly, John was without power, you were without power, and I was without power, and, like, we're all in different, like a triangle of different places in the country. So that's, yeah, as I said, that's its own topic that we've discussed at length.
Yeah, that's unbelievable. But barring that, with that out of the way, there's really no downside, because in fact, you know what, I'm gonna change my answer. I'll say there is one small downside, and maybe we can talk a little bit about this from a social atomization perspective, because I'm a father of one child. My son is almost 2. You have a couple of kids yourself. I worry sometimes that my son doesn't get enough interaction with other kids. And, obviously, hopefully in the future, he will have siblings, in the not too distant future. That will be a reality for him. And, even then, there's going to be a bit of an age gap. He can't play with a newborn that just came out of his mother's womb. So, I feel like if we were in Dublin or something, it would be easier to find other couples who have kids that we could have him play with and interact with. But as it stands, kind of all of his social interaction comes from myself and my wife, and that's fine. You know what I mean? I love playing with him. It's a great thing for him to engage with his mom and his dad, but I feel like that's not the same as playing with other kids his own age or close to his own age, and he
Mm.
doesn't really get as much of that just because of where we're situated and the difficulty logistically of setting up a play date or something. So I feel like that's probably a downside, and I don't know what the solution is there, you know?
Yeah, it is a tricky one. I mean, you mentioned the social atomization side of things. I wrote something about that last week because, as I say, we're back, as I've mentioned a couple of times now at this stage, at the risk of repeating myself yet again. We're back in Dublin at the moment. Staying, we always stay with my parents when we're in Dublin, and we were looking through some photo albums last week. And the thing that struck me, as I outlined in this article, was quite simply the number of people that my parents seemed to have around. I know they weren't doing it every day, but like, they would be at like gatherings and back gardens and things, that there were a good number of people at sort of social occasions or sort of life milestones and things like this. It was an opportunity for people to gather. And just like as I say, what struck my wife and I, so it wasn't just me getting this, was how many people were around, and also the settings in which they were gathering. They were gathering in each other's houses and things, which I think is another important piece of this, because as I was thinking about it, it sort of struck me that two trends were responsible. Because just to give some context, I would say my wife and I, as I kind of um, probably mentioned before, are pretty highly social people. We sort of prize our friendships a lot. We value them. We take like bank holiday weekends and things to travel and see friends. We because we have a lot of friends, but they live all over the place. Like, we made the vast majority of our friends here in Dublin, but everyone has since scattered to the wind to different parts of Ireland, and many of them to different countries as well. We obviously, as I mentioned before, live over in Poland, but even still, our friends live all over the place over there. And that's driven, I would say, primarily by the fact that no one can afford property next to each other. This was different in my parents' day when, like, even if they couldn't buy houses next to each other, they could all afford to live in generally the same area. Such that, like, my people that my parents went to school with, that they grew up with, they were all still able to gather for sort of, relatively easily for pretty frequently for things that required gathering. Whereas now, as I say, everyone's living all over the place, and so you meet up a couple of times a year with your really good friends, and that's very much our experience. And I think that social atomization is a sort of thing that for my entire adult life, people have been talking about and saying, oh, we will see the effects of this. It's not a good thing that's taking place. Whereas looking at these pictures, I was like, wow, it has already taken place. And we are experiencing, certainly those of us who are married and like would like to be around more young, couples and families, you're already feeling that effect. The other thing I think that plays into this, because like I outlined this in the article and I took a bit of thinking, so I might even get the figures wrong, is that my parents between them, so between my mom's side and my dad's side, had 6 siblings, say. Between my wife and I, on both sides of our family, we have 1 sibling. I have 1 brother. Um, then between to take it down a level, between, my side of the family, I have, 10 siblings. My wife has, or not siblings, sorry, 10 cousins. My wife has 10 cousins. Our kids are likely to have, well, I don't know how many they're likely to have. It depends on obviously whether uh, my brother has kids, but currently they have 0 cousins. So it's just like even these family networks have declined in size. And the grand result of all of this, anyway, is that fewer people around, certainly fewer people around physically. Um, just the networks aren't what they used to be. So I know living out in the countryside wouldn't necessarily help that, but it just seems to me that it's not necessarily much better in Dublin either. I know, as I say, that if we were living back here, most of the people we know moved out of Dublin, like yourselves included. So it's a bit of a bleak picture, and it does require some positives for this, making a greater effort with your friends as we're trying to do, so that you do see them and invest in them and things like that.
Yeah, that's a big thing. Like I honestly, this sounds super insulting to basically everybody I know, and I don't mean it to. Like I'm a I'm a fairly insular person in the sense that I don't really feel the desire. Like I've got a childhood best friend who he's like basically like a brother to me. Like I've known him since I was 12, and I text him every single day. We went to school together, and he's still like a really close male friend of mine. And I've got my wife for like female companionship, and that's kind of my social needs bar met I'm almost at 100% there where I'm like, I've got a bro who I can talk to about bro stuff, and I've got my wife. And other than that, I don't need. If I never had to talk to anybody else for the rest of my life, I'd basically be happy with that. But
Yeah.
yeah, I still. You're absolutely right that it's important to force yourself to do social things because I feel like you're not living a full life if you don't go to the occasional birthday party or you don't go to the staff Christmas party or whatever it is because humans are like man is a political animal. Like it's important that human beings go through these rituals of spending time together, congregating with one another. It's like civilizationally important. And that happens less and less. And it's easier now than it's ever been to get away with not doing those things. You can just say, oh, yeah, sorry, I'm remote working and I live in the middle of nowhere, so I'm not coming to your
Yeah.
thing. And people aren't going to get offended or upset. But you've both lost something because of that. You're kind of less human almost.
I would say as well, especially when kids come along, as you say, I do feel like we've certainly found that even meeting up a couple of times a year with friends who have kids of a similar age is enough for our son to like form a relationship with those kids and sort of remember them and things like that. And I do feel like in an age of social atomization where it's much harder to find people of like mind that you might like to be in touch with, hopefully throughout your life. You know, now admittedly it's sort of us doing it on our son's part because he's 2.5. He's hardly going to go meet them by himself. But we'd hope that he'll benefit from that in future. So it's just something that in Catholic circles there's a lot of talk these days about intentionality. And I think that that's a really important point that most people sort of either are not aware of or they don't understand the importance of it. That in order to sort of foster the good or accrue the good, you do have to be intentional about pursuing those things. Because I think we lived, thanks be to God, we inherited a great society. Um, it's kind of it is the best time to be alive, I would say, throughout human history, and we just took that for granted for a long time. And we're coming to see at this stage that you can take it for granted because then it all falls apart and you don't have it anymore. Whereas, yeah, you really do need to, on every sort of level, the personal, the social, the political, you have to make an active effort to maintain those good things. In this instance, sort of social connections and healthy ways of life. So, I know it's a bit of a rambling discussion, but that was kind of our experience lately.
Yeah. No, it's there's no easy way to approach these things. I mean, it's sort of you expect some traditions to be upturned when you have this level of technological advancement that it's you can't imagine that a society is going to go from no internet to anyone from anywhere in the world. Everyone can read and write, and we can all share our opinions with billions of people at will, and everybody's walking around with a camera on them at all times. And you've got artificial intelligence that can write poetry and create pictures of whatever you like. You're not going to add all of that to society and then all of our human interactions become remain the same and nothing is damaged in the process. Of course something's going to be damaged, things are going to be improved, but yeah, no, it's
I do think just to say that like people are always very wary, understandably so, and I would say rightly so, of social engineering. And of course that does take place consciously where governments or agencies attempt to change public opinion on things or public behaviors in relation to different things with more or less with higher or lower levels of success. But I do think the undervalued or not the undervalued but the underestimated um effect in this regard is the unconscious social engineering that takes place. Like I'm thinking this big time in relation to Elon Musk, like just creating things and putting things out there willy nilly and saying, hey, everyone get involved in the latest iteration of Grok. Like it's able to create all these new images. And he's like, tell your friends and family, let them have fun using. And it's like that is definitely having an effect on people. But he just thinks it's a cool thing he's made and he's giving it to everyone. So I think that the unconscious social engineering taking place is arguably has as much, if not more, of an impact on our lived experience, to put it that way, as the conscious stuff.
I mean on that exact point, like I don't want to have a go at him in the sense that like he's obviously contributed a huge amount to humanity, to free speech in particular. Like
Mm,
people are way too quick to throw other people under the bus who have
yeah.
done enormous good because they do something that you dislike. But I do have to say, like, Elon is one of the few people who understands the demographic crisis, for example, and what a disaster the low birth rate trend is going to be for the human race into the middle term, not even the long term.
Uh,
And that's great that he's such a prominent person who's willing to talk about that and who's cognizant of that problem. But then when I see the proliferation of like these AI companions who are it's basically like an artificial intelligence girlfriend who you can talk to. It's like an anime girl. I go, is that gonna help? You know what I mean? If we've already got
yeah,
young
yeah.
people not pairing up, not getting married, not having kids, society is withering and dying on the vine, and then we introduce the one of the few things that's going to get your ass off the couch and force you to go talk to girls as a young man is that desire for companionship, is that desire for a connection with a woman. And so if you can create an artificial facsimile of that fulfills that need, even if only partially, then you're just adding another reason for people to not bother to repair male female relationships, which is only going to make the demographics crisis worse, I would imagine. I'm not saying he's singularly and solely responsible for that, but I just don't think that sort of thing is constructive or helpful. I'm not sure that we've thought this all the way through.
Yeah, well, that's exactly it. I don't think it's the singular cause of that particular issue, but I don't think it helps, and I think it contributes. Like it's like people always talk about with pornography, and certainly with AI companions of various kinds. 'Cause I know you're able to get more or less tame ones, to put it that way. You're essentially just giving someone a dopamine hit for absolutely no effort, and the same kind of thing is achieved, I suppose, in relation to sort of the desire for adventure a lot of guys have with, say, video games, where again, you achieve a sort of similar dopamine hit, and indeed, there's a very social component to that with online gaming in particular. Um, it fulfills a lot of, say, particularly a man's needs without needing to bloody leave his bedroom. So I don't see a lot of these innovations as being particularly helpful or contributing to any sort of culture of, life ultimately, as we would talk about. But unless you have anything to add, I see we're at 50 minutes or so. And lest we just ramble for the whole episode, there was one important news story I thought we should probably bring up. I don't know what if you had anything to add.
No, no, that's about it. And I think I know the one you're going to talk about, but go ahead.
Yes, I was going to talk about Haiti and how an Irish citizen was kidnapped there over the weekend. Irish woman Gina Harity from originally from Westport, County Mayo, who has spent over 30 years working in Haiti. She moved there initially in 1993, as I understand it, and has been living there outside, not far from the Haitian capital of Port-au-Prince. She's been working with children and adults with disabilities at an orphanage in the commune of Kenskoff. I think I pronounced that properly. But anyways, so she was kidnapped along with 8 other people from that orphanage on Sunday. And we naturally put an article out on it this morning because she is unfortunately the latest in a number of certainly foreign nationals, but also quite peculiarly foreign missionaries kidnapped in Haiti in recent years because Miss Harity is as I understand it, a lay missionary with Via Taurus Christi, which is a faith-based international development organization. So where that's at the moment is she's in captivity. It seems armed individuals broke into the orphanage in the early hours of Sunday morning local time and took her along with as I say, 8 other hostages, one of whom is reportedly a 3-year-old child. And where it stands at the moment, obviously, the Irish government is exerting diplomatic efforts to sort of try and get it sorted. There are diplomatic teams in Dublin, Washington, D.C., and London sort of been tasked with working on the hostages' release. And the latest update we had about it was obviously Tánaiste to Simon Harris, who's also the Minister for Foreign Affairs, chatting with his Haitian counterpart, their Foreign Minister, Harvel Jean Baptiste, um, who the Taoiseach essentially said in his press release that he urged everything be done to secure the release of Gina and the other hostages, and that they're sort of staying in touch. And they described the case as extremely sensitive. So it's clearly a very serious situation. And all of those organizations that Miss Harity is involved with, the Viatores Christi, as I mentioned, but also, I'm going to butcher this pronunciation because it's a French titled organization, Non Petit Frere, it's sort of NPFS, France, both confirmed that they're keeping abreast of the situation too. So it's worth bringing up, even just to solicit prayers for her, because it seems like she has done some Trojan work out there over the course of the past 30 years. And indeed, if you look her up, there's she's received sort of various humanitarian awards, and she's pictured with the people who are presumably sort of the beneficiaries of her work in Haiti, which, just to give people a fact, like, we all know that Haiti is sort of absolutely racked with unrest, and the government only has marginal control there, unfortunately. But I included in the article, UN figures reveal that almost 350 people were kidnapped in Haiti in the first half of 2025. And around, this is astonishing, approximately 3,100 people have been killed in the same period this year. So it's an incredibly dangerous place to be based and doing work. Like, as you would say, she doesn't have to be there. Certainly easier ways of life that she could have chosen, but she did choose it. She said, and I included the quote, a previous quote from her in the article. She said, Haiti is often so brutal, but the challenge is to take the pain and see what you can do to relieve it. So she seems to be an incredibly admirable woman, and clearly a woman of, I would say, deep faith work, being a lay missionary as she is, and choosing to spend 30 or so years of her life out there. So it'd be very much worth, if you're of the praying sort, to pray for her safe recovery, and indeed safe recovery of the other 8 hostages who've been taken out there. And that's very much an ongoing case at the moment.
Absolutely. We keep everybody involved in mind going forward, and pray if that's the sort of thing that we do. And with that said, thank you all so much for listening, and we will catch you all next week. God bless.
God bless.